And we are live, guys. Hello, everyone. My name is Selvi Alabranova. I'm the social media head here at GMAT Club. And I'm here to welcome you to our MBA application walkthrough series, which is a 6-week series covering applications to top 25 MBA programs. Every Thursday and Friday till September 15th, we will feature admission experts and admissions teams going step by step through every aspect of the online application. Also, guys, subscribe to our channel right now to stay updated and support us in organizing more events. I will be your host, and in today's walkthrough, we are covering Michigan Ross. Together with me is Erin, who is an MBA expert at Personal MBA Coach. Erin has helped hundreds of people with their MBA applications, and it's awesome to have her here. But before we dive in, Erin, it would be great for you to introduce yourself as well to our YouTube audience.
Yes, thank you, Selby. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Erin Wand. Some of you might not be familiar with me because I don't do quite as many of these events, but I've been working behind the scenes at Personal MBA Coach for 9 years, and I'm a president at Personal MBA Coach, and I do all of our, in addition to our marketing, so I work with Selby, I do all of our knowledge management, and so at Personal MBA Coach, one of the things we do is we try to keep a really comprehensive knowledge base with guides on all the schools and for both our clients and for our internal employees. So I manage all that behind the scenes. So here today to talk about Ross, but if you have questions about other schools, we may have time to sort of answer more broader questions. Ross thankfully has a slightly shorter application. So feel free to put any questions into the comments and I'll be sure to go through them. So I'm going to get started here. I created an application just to sort of get us going, but I will walk through sort of each step. Once you create an application, the first thing you want to do is select your program. So for the purposes of this walkthrough, we did full-time MBA for the fall. If that's not you, you can select something different. It should be fairly similar. Ross is fairly traditional in that there are 3 application rounds. We've seen a couple of schools, Harvard jumped to 2 this year. Ross still does have 3. If you are targeting round 1, it's a little bit less than a month away. Many of you probably here today are sort of just getting started thinking about round 2. And Ross also does have a round 3. So round 1 and round 2 are generally the most popular rounds, but we see qualified candidates every year for whatever reason waiting until round 3. So that's also an option if you're sitting here saying, I'm thinking about applying, but I'm not quite ready to hit submit yet. So first page, pretty easy. I'll jump onto, now I will say Ross's application is a bit slow and even slower streaming. So just bear with me. It then goes through and tells you your selected program. You want to say whether you're a reapplicant. For the purpose of this demo, I did click yes, because if you are a reapplicant, you do have an extra essay. And so I wanted to get an opportunity to show that to folks who are reapplicants on this call today. They ask your citizenship, fairly straightforward. Are you interested in applying to, the 2-bar instance? What's great is that if you have, you click the info if you have any additional questions. So, this is for folks who are interested in operations or manufacturing. So if this clicks you, yes. Some pretty straightforward questions, joint degrees, are you currently enrolled and, which one? So, don't need to go into that a lot of detail here if this applies to you. And then finally, an application waiver. So Ross has a couple of categories of folks who are eligible for a waiver. So if this is you, select that. We're going to say no because most of the folks on this call probably don't fall into one of these narrow categories. So with that, I'm going to jump onto the next page. Again, some of the boring stuff up front. So feel free to stop us, ask questions. Selby will put those on, kind of pause me to answer the questions. So straightforward name information. If you've ever used another name, you want to include that. Social security number. And then, some basic, where are you a citizen? If you're a dual citizen, you want to put that down. That's great. You can answer whether you're LGBT. If you prefer, you can not disclose. And then whether we can share your information, no harm in sharing that. Some questions about your gender and how you identify, obviously, be honest there. Ethnicity questions, nothing, no surprises here. You want to be pretty straightforward, sort of, if any of these apply to you. Obviously, this section is optional, and with some of the Supreme Court rulings, this year will be a little different in terms of how folks handle that. But my advice here is to just be honest. Address. Surprisingly, some folks will ask, what address do I put? Put the address that you can be reached throughout the application process. If you travel a lot, some folks might put their parents' address, or if they are sort of thinking they may switch apartments, keep in mind, this is the address that they're going to be able to reach you at, from September all the way through till next spring. So if you think that might change, you want to put your parents' address, and then they ask, sort of your permanent address. For you, if your current address is one that you'll be there just for a year and you want to have a different address for permanent, you can put that down. And then, basic email. This page I'll kind of go through, pretty fast. You want to consent to Ross contacting you here. And, military, obviously, if this applies to you. Some of the stuff I'm going through pretty quickly because there's not a ton that's very exciting. Are you a first-generation college student? Obviously, if this is you, you want to put yes. Then we get into some of the careers. What's your primary career interest? This should match. Ross is one of those schools, and we'll spend a little bit of time going through goals. Ross is one of those schools that does ask you about goals in their application. So obviously this should match with your goals. No need to put a secondary career interest. We generally advise all of our clients to have one career. Schools know that you may change your mind. That said, if you have a strong second, you can put it on there, but that's definitely optional. How did you hear about this program? Just be honest. This doesn't matter. They're using this for marketing purposes. They're not going to favor you. And your LinkedIn profile, worth definitely sharing your LinkedIn profile. We do get clients every year that ask us about your LinkedIn profile. Keep it up to date, keep it professional. Keep in mind, schools will look at it. And there's no reason not to share that if you have one.
Erin, I got a question right
Sure.
here, and I'll bring it up. So someone asked, should I skip the race ethnicity question if I'm not a US citizen, or should I fill Asian as I am an Indian?
So that's a good question. I think honestly, it doesn't matter right now. I think they're not legally, allowed to use that. So I think if you want to skip it, they're just going to assume you came from an overrepresented demographic. They're going to figure some of that stuff out in the interview. So it doesn't really matter one way or another, particularly in light of current events. If it's a good question for you to answer, definitely go and answer it. But that said, you do want to, if that's something that's really unique to your story, and we'll talk about that later, you do want to make sure that, why your unique demographic background has shaped your experience and your goals. You want to make sure that that information is in your essays, because that is what they are allowed to use.
All right.
Great question.
Awesome.
So this next section asks about contact with Ross. Ross is a school that does want students who want to be there. So you should take the time to attend events. Doesn't matter if it's online or in person, particularly in this post-pandemic world, but you do want to take the time. If Ross is running an online event, attend. If you can talk to somebody in the Ross community, a great way to do that is if there's a club that you're particularly interested. Usually each of the clubs will have a contact member. Reach out to them, talk to them about what that club might need. There isn't a ton of space in your essays to put that in. So you do want to use this to show that you've taken the chance to get to know the community. That said, you don't want to list 20 names here. It's not necessary to, it's not like more is better, but they do want to show that you've taken the time to get to know the community. So I'm going to jump to the next section. Is there any other questions, Selby, that came in?
Not yet, but I'll definitely let you know.
Well, we haven't gone through anything that complicated yet. So
yet.
So this next section, spouse, partner. If you have a spouse that's going to be with you, definitely mention that. Obviously, if they attend the program, that's a good thing to say. That will help you, a little bit, if for no other reason than they know you're going to come if they are accepted. And then the Partners Club. It can be great. When I was at Yale, my now husband was with me, and he had joined some Partners Clubs events. It was good for him to get to know the community. He lived with me in New Haven, so definitely mention that. In terms of your parents, sorry, I wasn't sure if there's a question. In terms of your parents, definitely fill this out. There's no reason, there shouldn't be a reason, not to. If your parents are in the picture, you want to mention the education that they completed. No downside to sort of filling that out. Obviously, if you're a first generation, that can work in your favor. But that said, no reason not to be honest here.
Gotcha.
Alumni can never harm. If you have alumni that anyone in your family, definitely mention that. If you do click yes, they will ask you who, so keep that in mind. So this isn't the time to mention, a distant cousin, but anything particularly, all schools now are worried about yield and interested in yield. So anybody who has had a family member has more familiarity with the school. That just sends a signal that you might be a little more likely to go to Ross if you were selected, and you can add up to 3 here. All right, so while this rolls, if this is interesting, if you want to see more of these videos, definitely click like. It helps YouTube. Oops, fields were. So if you click yes and you don't have somebody, that does not work. So I'm going to go back and click no here. Don't want to put in a name. But yeah, that kind of just helps GMAT Club bring more of this content to you. If you like
For
this
sure.
video, that would be great.
And I do have a question.
Sure.
If I can bring it up. Okay.
Sure.
Someone's asked, hi, if I have attended plenty of events that Ross has organized, should we list them in bulletin points?
Yeah, so you can bullet them. That definitely makes sense. That said, I don't think you need to put like 10 events. It will be, overkill, but you should bullet them, that you've done. They don't need a lot of detail. They just want to know that you've listed. I would pick, maybe the 4 most significant, max 3. You don't need to go out of control.
And the same person asked one more question.
Sure.
Where they're saying, is there any space within the application other than the essay where students coming from physically divergent pool are noted or mentioned?
Do you mean from like a unique, gonna ask a clarifying question. Do you mean like from a unique demographic background?
Might be. I mean, if you're listening to Duarte.
So we'll go through the options. So there's a little bit of space to sort of put. Let's go through everything that you have. You can talk about sort of your family.
For sure.
I don't think, to be honest, and we'll see, because this changes every year. I don't think, they ask a little bit here in terms of, let me go back to the personal information. Some schools have added a question, very specific this year in terms of, is there anything unique about your family? Is there anything unique about your demographic background? I think for Ross, it looks like you have the option to select one or more of the races. I don't see an optional. All schools do have an optional essay. That said, you probably don't want to use it unless it's really unique. I haven't and unless it comes up in the last page and it's new, I haven't seen Ross do the question that, Harvard, for instance, asked this year. Is there anything unique about the way you grew up? That's not something that so far I've seen in Ross's application.
And this person did clarify, saying by physically, by the what do you call it? The physically divergent pool. They meant by students with disabilities.
Oh, okay. So something like that I would put in your optional. And we can talk a little bit about optional essays. We had an applicant this year who, generally you want to think about mentioning that information to how it will be relevant to your MBA application. So earlier this year, I was at a conference with admissions directors from, top schools, and there was a lot of conversation about folks volunteering a lot of information and the schools being like, so how does that affect you? So you want to think about, what does that mean in terms of, what accommodations will you need on campus? Is there any explanation for your current grades or anything in your circumstances? Think about how that's going to affect your ability on campus. But you don't need to tell them anything that they don't need to know. Apologies there.
One more last question before we jump to the next section. This was regarding the LinkedIn. So they're asking, does not providing a LinkedIn profile raise a red flag? And if so, how bad could it hurt your chances of getting in?
I don't know that it necessarily raises a red flag, but then it's not going to like really hurt. But there's no reason I guess my question back would be, why not? There shouldn't,
Yeah.
there should never be anything in your LinkedIn profile that you don't want to share. So if there's something in your LinkedIn profile that you don't want to share, I would say fix it. Your
Yeah.
LinkedIn profile is something that you're going to change to the extent. I mean, obviously, that might be one where we'd have to handle on a case by case basis if, for some reason, a past employer wrote something negative. But they can always Google you if you didn't do it, and employers background checks, they can look at it in terms of future employment. So I would say there probably shouldn't be a reason for almost everyone on this call today not to share your LinkedIn profile. And if there is, I would look at what you can change in your LinkedIn profile.
Awesome. All right.
Great. So the next section here is on your education. So I went to Yale for business school, so I added that here. It's pretty simple. I won't do the search. You click online, you have to search. You can search by city. Like I said, their website's been a little slow. To find your school, you want to search by city, state, country, and your school will come in there. And then they ask a couple questions about your academic background. I'm going to let this load, pretty straightforward: start date, end date, what level. Where I see the most questions come up is in terms of your GPA. So interestingly, it says, and this is a little bit confusing because it says GPA converted to 4.0 scale, and then if your institution doesn't use a scale, complete below. In general, the thinking is not to convert GPAs, to be pretty straightforward and to say, what they've used. So if your school doesn't use a 4.0 scale, just use whatever they do, whatever the school is, just fill this out. They're going to have your transcript. So in general, we tell folks not to calculate. Some schools go out of their way and say, do not calculate. Ross doesn't say that, but at the same time, they tell you how to explain what the scale is. So certainly if you do a conversion here, you want to make sure to clarify below the actual GPA. Transcript, pretty straightforward. Update your transcript. If you have a second institution, if you have a master's, some folks will apply with a master's, 1-year master's. This is the place to add it, or even an MBA from a different school, or that's the place to put it in. So test scores. Ross does accept the focus. And so you want to put your GMAT, your GRE. You can not submit. Ross does have the option to waive. We have a couple of videos on our site that are worth taking a look at in terms of waiving your score. In general, we say if you're going to apply for a test waiver, and this is true Ross or any school, if you're going to apply for a test waiver, you want to make sure that you have strong evidence of academic readiness elsewhere in your application. So if you have a low GPA, we generally never recommend that you waive. If you have a really strong GPA and you're just not a great test taker, waiving can be an option. Schools do have to obviously report schools. So, some schools will not accept somebody with a really low test because it will, not look favorably on the results. So for instance, at Columbia, we often see, the EA can be a better test to submit than the GRE. If you have a low score, we might, because the EA isn't, calculated. So this is an example where, you can waive. But if you're going to waive, they have to believe that you're going to be successful. And the point of the test score is to show that you have the academic readiness. So they say that right here, 200 words you have for this. As with any other, you want to be really direct. So if you're going to write a waiver essay, you want to be really specific. Don't make excuses. Don't say, I'm waiving because I didn't have time to take the test, or I'm waiving, be really specific. I have a strong GPA. I've excelled in X, Y, and Z. Particularly, they're looking for analytic skills. So you want to point out, I took calculus or I took accounting and I got a, high score here. And so this shows me that I can handle, or my job is very analytical. You want to be very specific at the evidence. And I wouldn't, unless your situation is really unique, I wouldn't spend a lot of time explaining why you didn't take the test. Just focus on the positives and why you are better, see why you can handle the academic rigor. All right, I'm actually gonna do this because it's a little bit quicker to get to the next page. My GPA was 4.0. We'd obviously write more than that, but I want to get page here. Is English your first language? Pretty straightforward. If you click no, they're going to ask you, did you go to a school in the US? If you say no there, then you're going to have to look for, a TOEFL or English proficiency. So for the purposes of keeping this quick, I'm going to submit yes here. So we can jump on to the little more interesting stuff.
All right. But I do have some questions related to the test, so yeah, I can bring them up. Okay.
Please do.
Alrighty. Okay, so we have a first question. Hi, is the school accepting GMAT Focus Edition scores for round 2 admissions this year? A couple of schools have released a statement disallowing Focus Edition scores for this year, round 1 and round 2.
Yeah. So it looks like Ross is accepting the focus. That was actually one of the options in the dropdown. It's true that some schools, are not accepting it. That said, if you're applying round 1, it's going to be really hard to have a focus score, in time, because the focus, I don't even think the first focus testing date is after, the round 1 deadline. Now that said, there will be candidates who, maybe a shorter test works better for you, and you want to wait to apply. You can also, it is possible to apply and then submit a score after the fact. That is something that folks could do. You would send an email, send an update with your new score. But Ross will be accepting the focus this year. We are telling folks that if you think you can do well in the traditional GMAT, take the regular GMAT, because admissions directors are just more familiar with it. But if it's something that you're struggling with, the focus could be a good option.
Alrighty. Okay, I got one more question here. Can international students also take EA instead of GRE for their 2-year full-time MBA?
Yeah, so it depends on the school. It does not look like Ross is allowing the EA this year. That was not one of the options. Some schools do allow the EA. So Columbia's that allows it for full-time. And there's a list on our website. We have a blog that will go through all the different schools and who takes EA and who doesn't. But I do not believe that Ross is taking the EA this year.
And last question, can we put in the GPA that we received from WES evaluation?
I actually don't know what the WES evaluation is.
I think it's World Education Services.
Okay. Sorry, I should know that. That's not one that we see.
I literally searched it up right now, so it's okay.
I know. That's not something. Yeah, I mean, you can put it in there. I'd say, so you can certainly put that in there if you're talking about a waiver. Anything that you have that can show your academic ability, you can put that in there. So apologies, that's actually not one that we get. Scott would know the
answer. Alrighty. Okay, I think we're done.
Okay, great. All right, so let me jump into the employment stuff. So this is one where, they want to know the months. This employment is as of when you start your program. So you want to calculate assuming that you're going to work up until your start date. So as every school is a little bit different, but Ross says not to include summer internships in that number of months of full-time work experience. So this is the amount of time that you've worked from when you graduated until you're going to start your program. I have had some folks we had an applicant this year who said that, they had a smaller number of full-time work experience, but they did, military work, or they had, pretty significant undergrad work experience. That's something that you could talk about in the optional essay, but you don't want to include that here. Select the industry that best describes, your industry where you current work and your function. Take your best guess. If it doesn't apply to you here, we get a lot of folks, well, I'm kind of in between this and that. A lot of this stuff is just, for them in their own back end calculations. So just take your best guess, but don't lose a lot of sleep in terms of which drop down to pick here. And then if you do have certificates, some schools will say list them. Ross has, you check, so it makes it a little bit easier to use the certificate count if you've taken the Series 7, or if you've taken, the CFA, great to do that. If you're in, don't worry if you haven't taken any of these, unless you're working in one of these particular fields, most applicants will not have taken them. And so you can upload the license here. So next is the employment section. This is probably where the most questions come in. Ross actually doesn't have a very detailed employment section. Some schools have very specific, describe your, Wharton, for instance, describe your most significant accomplishment or the biggest challenge that you faced. Ross's employment section is pretty straightforward. So obviously put in, your employer phone number. You do want to put in your income here. You want to be honest with your income. We get a lot of questions about why are they asking about income. Income is in for better or for worse, often a marker of success in a job. Is even more true in certain finance fields and private equity. That said, don't, if your income is low because you work in another country, there the cost of living is lower, or if you work for a nonprofit, don't lose sleep over that. But that's why they ask about the income. Bonus is separate. If you don't know what your bonus is, then I would say some folks will say, I haven't gotten my bonus yet, but I'm gonna get bonus. What I recommend in that case is put in your bonus and then put a note that it's an expected bonus in the optional if that situation applies for you. Job titles, pretty straightforward here. Number of months you're employed at that particular job. And then your reason for leaving. Generally, we say keep this positive. If you left a job, it's usually not, this is not the time to complain about an employer or, I left because it was a bad environment. This is, think about what you're going to gain in your new job and put that as your reason for leaving. And if this is your current job, you do not need to have a reason for leaving because you haven't left yet. So one less thing to worry about.
Yeah.
We sometimes we'll go in and test the amount of characters that you can use. So all of our clients get what we call short answer guides, and we have someone on our team who goes into these applications and copies down each of these fields and then gives really specific guidance. And so in the reason for leaving field, sometimes we'll put in dummy data because people will ask, how many characters can I have? Is this 100 or 200? So we'll go and test it out. So that's why there was a little bit of gibberish in our testing out there. Any questions? I'll be on the employment section.
Not on the employment, but a few on the test. So we can take those up, I guess, in the end.
We can stop. Okay, whatever you think. I'm happy to stop now if you.
Okay, sure. I can bring them up now as well. Alrighty. So we have a question here. Do we definitely need an English score from TOEFL or IELTS?
So there was a couple of options. If you went to school in the U.S., you don't need one. And then if not, you can, there was an option to submit evidence of English proficiency. So Ross gave you a couple options up there besides the TOEFL.
Gotcha. All right. Next one is, hi, when is the ideal timeline to submit your GRE score after you have sent in your application?
So let me clarify there. You need to have a GRE score if you're going to submit one before you submit your application. That said, if you have submitted your application, I would say a school like for Ross, if your score is not where you want it to be, I would wait till round 2 and submit. And we have clients every year that, especially this time of year, it's mid-August and I was hoping to make round 1, but my score is just not where I want it to be. You want to submit it. You want to submit your application when you're ready. Now, that said, there are sometimes, and we see this probably more often in round 2 because for Ross and for many schools, round 1 and round 2, there isn't a huge advantage. Now, round 3, we do say can be a little bit harder. So we see this more after round 2, where if your score is in the range of acceptable, we say go ahead and submit it, but then keep studying. So don't give up. So round 2 deadlines came. It's January 15th, but I'm going to keep studying. And then February 1st comes along, and I took the test again and I got a better score. You do want to submit them and let them know. You want to make sure that you get it to them as soon as possible and before their first decision. So there's certain schools so I don't know offhand for round 2, the day that they let interview invites come out or acceptance, but obviously, sooner rather than later. Some folks who are borderline will be put on a wait list. And so then you have the opportunity to take it again after you've been on the wait list. But hope that makes a little bit more sense in terms of when to send that follow-up score. Our biggest point is, you want to have a strong application when you apply, but if you got it almost there and not quite where you wanted to be, don't give up, don't stop studying, because you can still submit a score.
All right, awesome. And before I go to the next question, guys, hit the like button and
Yes.
subscribe.
Yes. Hopefully you find this helpful, and feel free to, put comments into the ask questions. So
Yep.
are
Alrighty,
folks
next.
applying round one or round two? If you're have any curious, if you feel like letting us know, that we'll
Yeah,
kind of take a look as we
do
go
let us
along.
know in the comments, round one or round two, or even round three. I mean, we're
You're a
waiting for
real
that.
go-getter. You here in August for round three. That's what we love to see.
Yeah. Alrighty. Another question here is, can I take the English proficiency test after submitting my application and update the score within a reasonable time frame?
I don't I think that's a very good question. I'm not 100% sure if Ross will let you submit it after the fact. Usually you need
Mhm.
to have something ready to go. That's a type of question, though. You can feel free to reach out to admissions. You can call them there. You can send them an email if it's that specific. I think the only pushback I would say is there should be a reason why you haven't taken it yet. So
Mm,
anytime you kind of look for an exception, there should be a reason. So if for whatever reason the test isn't offered, or you're traveling, or your work has you in a different location, have a specific reason. It shouldn't be, oh, I didn't feel like it, or I was going on vacation.
yeah,
So you can ask for exceptions, or what's their policy around those things, but you should have a reason for asking that.
makes sense. And or someone did comment saying definitely not around round one. So
And that's fine. We
there you go.
expect that many of you who are on this call today. Um,
Yeah, makes
I see
sense.
them.
Yeah, we got one more question regarding the employment section. So they're asking, does Ross use third-party services to check the credibility of employers that are mentioned in the application? He's also mentioned like to check the legibility of what the student has mentioned in the employment section.
Yeah, so most schools will do a background check after you've been accepted. And I can't speak to are they going to check every single person all the time? But most schools do a background check after you're accepted, so they won't do it before they make an admission decision. But if you lied about
Mhm.
something, then definitely I would say do not lie about something in your application
Yeah.
at all, because even if there's going to be instances, and I'm sure we've all read about them on the news, where you start school and then they find out that you lied on your application, and now you can risk getting kicked out of school, or risk getting kicked out of a
Yeah.
job. So whether or not they're going to check it, there shouldn't be any concern in your mind if they do check it. Everything on there should
Mm,
check out. So
mhm.
assume yes, and be honest. If
Yeah,
there are
for sure.
instances where I've seen folks who are say, well, my title in my HR is one title, and the title that my boss agreed to is another, and my boss said this, I would put the title that's in the system in HR, and then you can put, some sort of a note in there. But when in doubt, be as honest.
Mhm. Makes sense. All right. We do have some people who commented that there is one person applying on round one. So good luck.
Yeah. That probably explains the English proficiency test, because I know your time is tight. So I would say do what you can
Yeah.
to get it in now, and give Ross a call and see what they say there.
And previous student said that they're aiming for round two. And they did have a question where they said, like, when it comes to scholarships, does round one have any advantage over round two?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally, I think it depends on the school. For Ross, particularly, there's usually, I'd say, apply when you have the best chance of scholarships is when you can put together the best application. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you are waiting until round two, there should be a reason. So I don't think most
Mm-hmm.
schools try to hold by round three. Sometimes we say there's fewer scholarships. Usually there's scholarship money. They set it aside for both round one and round two applicants. So
Mm-hmm.
but you should, if you're ready to go, certainly, go ahead. But my guess is if you're asking that question, you probably think that your application is going to be stronger if you wait until round two, because you've had more time to work on the essays, more time to engage, get your score up. And that's really going to be the best, increase your chances of scholarship the most, is by having that
Mm-hmm.
application.
Awesome. We have like five more questions. So,
Okay.
I mean, feel free to like go to the next section and then I can bring them up
Okay, sure. Let's
right
go
after.
through, we'll go through the next section, and then we can
Yeah.
pause for questions, and we should hopefully have time, at the end. Lots of questions, which
Yeah.
was great. So glad everyone's engaged.
Very good.
So the resume, Ross, like every other school, does ask you to upload a resume. At Personal MBA Coach, we work with all of our clients developing what we call an MBA resume or a business resume. I'd say rarely have I seen a case where the resume that you use to apply for a job is what you want to submit to the business school. So you do want to take some time. The biggest differences here is all that industry jargon that you're used to putting into your business resume that you're applying for a job isn't as important when it comes to business school. Instead, they want to think about results. They want to look at takeaways, transferable skills, not all that kind of, all that sort of really specific. They're less interested in your ability to use, SAP or your knowledge of, SAS or any of the particular programs. And they're more interested in sort of the so what and the broader results there. And you also, in an MBA resume, which you might not have, you do want to talk a little bit about who you are outside of the office. Usually we recommend in our template that we give our clients, we have a section about additional information. So you want to add a little bit something about yourself. So you want to put your resume in here. And then essays. Luckily, Ross's essays are fairly short. So maybe I'll talk about the optional essay and then we can pause and take a question or two. And then I'll go through sort of the core essays. So as I said, I put yes as a reapplicant at the beginning to show you guys everything. If you are a reapplicant, you do need to submit an update essay. 200 words is very short. But you want to think about here, you want to focus on how are you a stronger candidate? So while it's good to include something about how you've taken the time to get to know Ross and confirmed your interest, you do want to show growth. So that can be outside of work. So we work a lot with clients, particularly either early clients or clients who didn't get in on what we call early planning. So thinking about how you can beef up your extracurricular profile, how you can get more involved outside of the office, or what job moves you should make. So you do want to think about what have you done since last year? Where have you gotten more involved? If you've been promoted, great, say that. If you got put on a big project, talk about that. And don't just talk about what you did, talk about what you learned from that project and how that will help you be successful at Ross. So that's what you want to make sure to get into your optional essay. And then maybe I'll take a question or two, and then we will go into the core essays for Ross, which are a little bit different and kind of fun.
Alrighty. Okay, I'll start bringing a few up. Okay, a question here. Is it recommended to get a profile evaluation before applying? And if so, then how to do so?
So if I would go on Ross's website, I wouldn't say it's recommended. You don't need to go to, if you have a unique profile and you're questioning. So, there's a lot of discussion at the last AGAT conference with admissions directors in terms of, is EMBA better for me? Am I too early in my career? Am I too late in career, part-time? If you have a specific question that you want to get a profile evaluation to see, which program makes sense for you, I would say go ahead and do that. We see profile evaluations, most often with MBA applicants. I wouldn't say everybody should go get one, because if you're like, oh, I'm wonderful, and your goal is for them to tell you you're wonderful, not sure what you're going to benefit. But if you have a really specific question and you're wondering, is it now? Should I wait another year? Then I would say go ahead and do that. But there should be a reason for it. They obviously can't do it for everybody, or they would. That would be their full-time job.
Alrighty. Okay, next question here. How do I put my job title in if it's not in English?
Well, I would say translate it as best as possible. Anything, if your job title, use whatever translation that you have and translate it as best as possible to the equivalent. So no one's going to fault you if it's not an exact translation. When I talk about background check, matching your title, as close as you can to the English words. You can also ask, you can certainly say to HR, how would you, if somebody asked, just ask them. If someone obviously is going to have to be able to speak English at your company to be able to do a validation. So just ask them how they would describe it.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Let's do one more and then I'll jump into the essays.
Okay, sure. Maybe then I can bring up a question about the resume section.
Sure.
So someone asked, is it advisable to add a little introduction about us in our resume?
I would say no, it's not something that we have in our template. It's something that I've seen more and more in business
Mhm.
resumes. But you have your essays. I would say stick to your accomplishments for full time. We say 1 page. And if you want to be able to fit, your jobs, have specific accomplishments, talk about your education, there's generally no space for an about us, and it's not something that we do on a regular
Mhm.
basis. In fact, we don't do it at all with our clients.
Alrighty. Oh, also, Jackson Matthew sent 20 rupees as a little gift to the session. So thank you.
Thank you guys for
That's
all the great questions and engagement here.
yeah.
This is really
Yeah,
fun.
like, subscribe, and send money.
We have
Crazy.
that as another one. All right, so I'm
Yeah.
going to jump into the essays. Ross has definitely the most unique essays out there and the shortest. So I think the biggest challenge if you're applying to Ross is that there is two 100-word essays aside from the career goal, and that is obviously very little. And so, and some folks say, oh, it's easy, I have less to write, but it's actually a lot harder to write less than more. So you really do want to think about what you are going to get across in these essays. So I'll just go through the three options. So the first group is you get to pick one of these three. So either I want people to know that I blank, I made a difference when I blank, or I was aware that I was different when blank. So generally what we advise with this first group is, if you notice, they all three kind of get to your story, your personal story, what makes you unique, what makes you stand out. Ross will ask about your goals. We say that at least one of these should be personal. In some cases, there can both be personal, but definitely this is sort of your one chance. Someone just asked about the about us section. This is sort of your chance to think about how you stand out. So if you were thinking about admissions directors are trying to create a well-rounded class, so this is your one chance to sort of think about your story. What's your most unique accomplishment? What sets you apart from your classmates? What are your biggest passions? Extracurriculars make a great option here. Volunteer work. So certainly, yeah, I made a difference when, or I want people to know that and that's your chance to tell them something about you. So I made a difference when I was volunteering, with this organization, or I want people to know that I have this really cool skill or passion. I want people to know that I love hiking and this is what matters most to me. And sometimes if that's a big part of your story and you want to go, this is where I tell folks to think about their broader story. So if you have a really passion for environmental sustainability and it came from all from your experience, this is a kind of a unique, just off the cup, hiking, or that's a great thing to talk about. If you grew up with a unique sport and the sport is something that really sets you apart. So this is sort of where, we talk a lot about personal story. 100 words is really short. So I would say do not pick something when you say, I want people to know that. Don't pick something that's complicated to set up, that's hard to understand, because you don't really have a lot of space. You don't need to talk about Ross here. You don't need to have some, really big, kind of takeaway or learning. Just sort of think about what makes you most unique. And you're going to upload this is a file here. The second quest group is there's three options here. I was out of my comfort zone when, I was humbled when, and I was challenged when. So we think about this second group as a chance to tell the admissions committee a little bit about sort of who you are, how you act, what might you be like in the classroom. If you think about, these are all examples of, how did you respond? You're out of your comfort zone. You travel to a country where you didn't speak the language. How did you respond? Or what humbles you, what challenges you. So if you want to think about, just a little bit about your personality and what it's like to work with you, this is sort of where you show your leadership in action. And so that's sort of how we like to think about those two. They are challenging essays. If you need help, that's what we're here for. But in terms of that's sort of the biggest way I say to think about those two groups, and make sure that at least one of those is personal. Any questions on the essays before I jump into the? Doesn't look like it.
On essays, yeah. Oh, I think, yeah, we do have one.
Okay.
Someone asked, I plan to write an optional essay about my gap year. Can I keep it crisp and short with bullets, or would you advise that I write a detailed essay?
I'd say somewhere in between. Definitely keep it quick, and keep it short. I'd probably go beyond bullets. When we're writing about gap years, we generally want to think about what you've accomplished. So, what did you
Mhm.
learn? What did you do? And how is that going to help you? Couple sentences, but I think bullets might seem just a little bit too. I want to say lazy, but I don't want a detailed essay. A couple sentences,
Yeah,
but I would write out full sentences there.
gotcha. And we
Okay.
got one more,
Sure.
if you know it. What are the questions that you recommend that we ask ourselves or ponder upon to get our story across in the best way possible?
Sure, those are great questions. So for the first one, we actually have some good videos on our website about personal story. In fact, one of our favorites is when you think about like what if you were to have to tell someone in like one or two words, what sets you apart. Like, why are you so? If you come, particularly, this is true if you come from an overrepresented field. So every year we work with a lot of consultants, a lot of bankers, and they ask, okay, well, how am I different from other consultants? So you want to think about what is that one thing that really sets you apart, and you want to then backfill it into that option. So if what makes you unique is that you came from this really unique place, then say that. If what makes you unique is that you have a passion for artificial intelligence, or that you really are interested in healthcare, or even if you're going to be a consultant, for example, we tell folks not to say, I want to come back to consulting, and we're going to talk about goals in a second, but I want to be a consultant who works on X, Y, and Z because I'm really passionate about this. That is definitely something you want to get across. If extracurriculars are really important to your story, so if you learned a lot through sports, that can be a great way to tell a personal story. Get that in here. If volunteering is a big part of who you are, if traveling is a big part of who you are. So I would say, ask yourself, what is the one thing that's going to make them say, okay, this person is all about, X, and then get that theme in there. For the second essay, I would say think about what's the best part about studying with me? Like, why do you want me to be in the classroom with you? What do you think you're going to add? Why would your classmates want to be with you? And then
Mhm.
think of a story that sort of shows the type of person you are. Are you very compassionate? Do you love to, do you help folks with tutoring? Or you have a certain leadership style? If you came from the military, then that's your strength. And I mean, one of my best friends when I was in business school was in the military, and like, that was a big part of what helped her in school. So just think about sort of what would make you a good contribute to your, I don't want to say learning team because not everyone, but to that your peers, and pick a story
Mhm.
that's going to show what it's like to study with you.
Alrighty. The student said, thank you for answering the question so much in detail.
Okay.
Detail, really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
All right, I'm gonna jump to because I don't want to run at. I know we said we were gonna end at 1, and we can go a few minutes over. But for those that have a
For
hard stop,
sure.
I want to make sure I get to the last couple of things. Oh, look, and I did the resume out of order. Um, but because they're
Oops.
saying here. But so Ross asks for a career goal question, very short. In fact, I think last year this essay was 200 words. We've seen a lot of folks making shorter and shorter essays, maybe to make it easier for applicants, probably also to make it easier for admissions directors. But being able to say things succinctly is really important. So they're asking, what's your short-term career goal and why is this goal right for you? One of the things we do at Personal MBA Coach is career goals are really important to us, and we have all of our applicants work on goals as a separate essay, whether or not the school asks it. So Ross has a specific career goals essay, whereas other schools like Columbia and Wharton, you will weave your goals into a core essay. But you really do want to take the time to think about what are you going to do after business school, and not only that, but even more, not just, I said this in a minute ago, not just I want to be a consultant, but I want to be a banker, but what area? If you want to go into CPG, not just I want to drive, value. I'm really interested in, what aspects. So I have a CPG background. And so for me, I think about not just, oh, I want to drive revenue, or I want to drive customer loyalty. What ways do you think you might do that? So you don't have a ton of space with 150 words, but you definitely want to show that you've thought about your industry and what change that you're going to drive. And in this essay, they also ask, why is this goal right for you? That is a kind of a double, there's sort of two reasons that you want to touch. So the first is, why is it right for you? Is in, does this goal make sense for you? So a lot of times people will say, well, why are they asking you about goals? I'm going to write one thing and I'm going to go to school and do something else. Schools know that, but they really want to make sure you've thought through, what have you done? What do you want to do? And where does Ross fit into the equation? So while you don't have room in this essay, and we don't recommend it for Ross to say, I'm going to take X, Y, and Z classes like some schools, you do want to think that of what you've done today. So I have spent the last 3 years working in consulting on healthcare deals, and now I want to take that knowledge and go launch, a new a new like device. I've seen some devices in healthcare. And so you set the context of what you've done. And then you want to talk about, so you have the skills, this is what you want to do. And you also want to, if you can fit, why is this interesting to you? So this is where you think about your story. And if you can, the win-win is when you can tie it all together. So this is interesting to you because you volunteered in the healthcare space, and now you worked in consulting and you got to do 1 or 2 healthcare projects, and now you developed this passion for healthcare. So you want to show, why do you want to do it, and why are you well positioned to do it? It's a tall order in 150 words. So avoid any fluff, right? Get right to the point. That's one of the things that I see most often. One of the things that I do in my role is I manage all of our editors and see all of the essays that come out the door. And so definitely I spend a lot of time deleting and cutting, extra words. So really think about each word and what does it add. I'll pause for questions. I see a couple in the chat now that I've gone through the kind of essay, and then I'll talk about professional.
Sure, I can bring one up. How deep and specific do we have to be in our goals essay, especially if we are going for an industry pivot?
So overall, I say you want to be specific. One of the biggest mistakes that I see is a goal statement that describes a job description. So if your goal, I want to be a consultant and get broad industry exposure, every consultant's going to get broad industry exposure. So if anybody in that role could write the same goal statement, then you're not being specific enough. Now, that said, you don't have a ton of space for Ross. You probably have about, half the essay maybe. So you don't have a ton of space, but you do want to be specific. And we do have candidates who say, well, I'm struggling. I don't know anything about this industry. Well, take some time. If you're going to say, I want to join the pharma industry, or I want to join consumer products industry, or I want to join finance, you should have given some thought into what are the problems in that industry that you want to solve. We ask candidates a lot to push on their vision. So you should have some idea of where the industry is going. What challenges does that industry have, and how might you solve them? So obviously you don't have to have it all figured out, but whether it's in the essay or in the interviews, you should have taken some time to give it thought. And just so that you can show that you've really thought through, why do you want an MBA? Why is this the career? You do want to be able to show that passion, and some level of specificity is needed for that.
All right. Should I take up one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Ross is known for its social impact. I would like to get my MBA in social impact as well. Any specific questions that will help the AdCom to see us answer via our goal essays?
Yeah. So, if social impact is something you're interested in, that should be, in your goal statement. So you should be pretty specific in a couple of places. One, if you have any evidence of social impact in the past, get that into one of you. I made a difference when is a great option, for that question. That should obviously, when you set your context as to why this goal is right for you, you want to either say, I've done X, Y, and Z, or I'm interested in X, Y, and Z, so definitely get that into your goals. You don't have to be going into social impact to go to Ross. All schools now are having more interest in folks, so it's less of a, to do social impact, I have to go to Yale or I have to go to Ross. And, but that said, if that's your goal, by all means, put it out there, be as explicit as possible.
Makes sense.
I'm going to
All
jump
right.
to the last couple pages because we only have
Sure.
5 minutes left, but then I can stay for questions. The
Yeah.
optional statement, I would say, so Ross does have an optional essay here. You want to use this. We talked a little bit about employment gaps. We talked about if you have a low GPA, if you have health issues, if you have disabilities, this is the place to put this in here. You can, so I will say that you have a little bit, because Ross's essays are so short. In fact, at the conference that I was at, the Ross admissions director was there. They have a little bit more interest in using that space. So you can talk about supplemental coursework in here. So unlike some other schools where I say, only use it sparingly, a little bit more wiggle room to use this. But that should be something that they really need to know about you here. And something like supplemental coursework is important if you have a low GPA. It's important if you're waiving the test. If you had a high GPA, I wouldn't say don't waste the time adding that in there. Photo optional. I'd say there's no reason not to put a photo if you're hiding yourself. Generally we say we say don't use optionals. There's no reason not to put a photo of yourself in there.
Mm.
And then I'm just going to jump quickly to the last couple pages since we're almost out of time. Oh, and then of course, I didn't upload the essays, so it's not going to let me go on. So I'm going to upload our guide. I said we have a client guide for folks. So actually, it's going to let me. We'll see if it will let me without uploading all those files because we'll be here all day. Okay, good. Ross only requires one recommender, one recommendation. You need to say the relationship to you. If it's not your supervisor, some folks can't ask their supervisor because they don't know if they're applying. Their supervisor doesn't know they're applying to school, or they're new to the job. Those are the two most common reasons where you would not pick your direct supervisor. If you can pick your direct supervisor, it's definitely preferred. And if not, then explain that. So only one recommendation. You should always waive. If you don't waive, they're going to wonder why. Many recommenders will still show it to you. In fact, reviewing recommendation letters is something we do as part of our comprehensive package. We'll look at them and give your recommenders feedback. Most people will share it, but you should certainly waive it. And then the rest of this is just pretty straightforward. The only thing I would say, if you are resident, then certainly do that. Crime, contact. We kind of talked about this early on in terms of being honest. If there's anything they're going to find, you want to say it ahead of time. You can explain it in the optionals. Some folks will come to us and say, well, I was suspended for drinking on campus, or, we've even had applicants that were convicted of a crime. Just be honest, explain the situation. We're all human, but don't try to hide anything, because if they figure it out after the fact, you're going to have wasted a lot of time and a lot of money going to school and then to get kicked out. And then finally, just certify that it's all true. That's obviously pretty straightforward. So we're just at time. I will switch out of the application, but I can stay a little bit longer and answer a couple of other questions that folks have.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And like this video if you
I can see that some of you guys have not liked yet, so just hit that like button. Alrighty. Okay, there are a few questions beforehand that we did not answer. The first one is, if I graduated from a university with English as the primary language of communication, can my TOEFL be waived?
Yep. I think in fact there was a drop down with what are your options of how are you going to prove English label, and one of them is that your school was in English.
Gotcha. All right. The other question is, does a low IR score have a negative impact on one's chances, even if the overall score is relatively good?
I mean, you obviously, they're going to look at it holistically. So if the overall score is good, that's what's most important. That's hard to answer in isolation because it's going to depend on how low, it's going to depend on your GPA. You want to look at it all overall. That's kind of where I need to see the whole picture. That's one of the things we always say to folks, the scores in general, they're one piece of the pie. And they're going to use to show, can you succeed? Because that's one of admissions directors' biggest jobs, is to bring folks in to succeed. Nobody wants to have you start school and then struggle and fail. And so you need to think about, can you show your success elsewhere? But usually it's not a huge factor.
Makes sense. All right. Next question. I volunteer as a director of communications at an NGO. Would it be helpful to add this in my resume, as it is not my full-time job?
Yep, definitely. Ross doesn't have space to add extracurricular activities, which is interesting. Most schools will, regardless of whether the school has space. Definitely put that in there. That's one of the reasons why I said don't put an introduction. You do want to have your primary job. You want to have what you've done at school, and you do want to have any outside work. And then if it's a big part of your role, perhaps that could be something that you use an example of for one of your essays, especially if an NGO is somewhere you want to go after business school. You might think about putting that in your essays, but definitely put it on your resume.
Gotcha. All right. Student asks here, it took me 2 years and 5 attempts to get the GMAT score. Is that a negative in my profile?
No, I mean, many folks will take this test again. It shows that you've taken the time to learn. In fact, we see more concerns where you get a low score and then you gave up. We're seeing a lot of applicants take the test multiple times. Some folks take it the first time just in school, and they'll take it just on a whim without studying and see how they do. So they don't know that you didn't just take it and do other things or change your plan. So don't worry about it. Take the best score. Keep taking it as many times as you're allowed to get the score.
Exactly. I mean, you can take it like 8 times, right? So
and a lot of folks do. So.
Yeah. Alrighty. The same person asked, I am in aviation industry and I'm very interested to continue in the same industry, but as an international, I will target consulting. How can I tie the aviation and consulting together?
So a couple ways. So for Ross specifically, you generally don't have a ton of room to put your long-term goal, but sometimes we have folks use that why to talk about their long-term goal. So why is this the right goal for me? Because it will prepare me for X long-term goal. So one option is to mention, if you can find it, there are some consulting firms that have aviation clients. So you can look for a firm that does have clients in the aviation industry and then say, I want to work in consulting and specialize in aviation clients. And this will prepare me, for my long-term goal. Or you can talk about what skills you think you will need to succeed in the aviation industry long-term. And the why can talk about, how you will gain those skills in consulting.
All right. Okay.
We see a lot of consulting and then switch to another industry.
Alrighty. Can I go to the next question?
Sure.
Okay. This person asked, online says 500 words for recommendation responses. Should you ask your recommender to aim towards that number, or is that a max word count?
So that's a max word count. So you don't need to use every word. That said, I don't know that I'd have them submit 100 words when you have 500. So generally, because that just looks like they didn't, take the time. So I wouldn't worry if it's, 400 words, but I wouldn't have them submit something that's too short, because, then they're missing opportunities to say all those great things about you. And you want your recommenders to be specific, and they need that space to do it.
And we got a lot of people who are thanking you for answering and just bringing some of them up here.
Thank you. God, this is helpful. I don't do these very often, so it's fun.
Yeah, and I think we got like a few questions left. I guess we can take them up.
Yeah, we'll take the last couple questions.
Okay, so what are the questions or examples that AdCom like to see the employers answer in the recommendations section?
Yeah, so one of the things you want to think about as you're advising your recommenders is to be specific. If you want to think about how have you succeeded relative to others in your peer group. So great examples are, they did X, Y, and Z project, which puts them in the top, 10, or they worked on something that isn't usual for somebody in this level. So specific examples of something that they've done in the job and how this compares them to others, and how they've sort of stood out and gone above and beyond both expectations and their peers. and like I said, be specific. And one of the things that we do, less of an issue with Ross because you don't have a ton of space, but we do recommend that you share your essays with your recommenders, because if you're telling one story and, for Kellogg asked for a leadership story, and I know we're not talking about Kellogg, but I know many of you are applying to more than one school, so I'll throw it out there. You don't want to tell the same story as your recommender. A, people might think, oh, is that their only success? And B, you're just wasting valuable real estate to sell yourself and everything you have to offer.
Alrighty, and I guess this is the last question. Is it common for students with lower than class average GPA receiving scholarships?
So it's definitely, the GPA is one of many factors. Looking at, your background, what industry you've done, what industry you're in, what you uniquely have. We certainly see scholarships to folks with lower than average GPAs if they come from a really unique background, or if they've done something, very specific. They want well-rounded classes. Well-rounded classes. Sorry. It's a long day already. It's only 1:00 here. They want well-rounded classes. So you think about what you'll add to the table. So certainly the GPA is one thing, but it's not the be all end all.
Alrighty. Yeah, they said thank you for answering. Go Blue. All right.
I see one last question
one last question. I just want to say. They asked, does Ross have a preference towards GMAT compared to the GRE?
Yeah. So in general, we say none of the schools have preferences from the GMAT versus the GRE. A slight advantage. GMAT's more common. It was designed for business schools. So we do see, if your score is going to be the same, we see more folks take the GMAT, but the GRE is increasing a much higher percentage. If you're debating which to do, the best advice I would give is take a practice test in both and see what you're going to do better in. I'd much rather see a stronger GRE score than a weaker GMAT score. That said, if you think you can do just as well on both, I'd probably take the GMAT.
Makes sense. All right. Again, a lot of thank yous here. Yeah, and I mean, Erin, I'm sure there'll be more questions coming up. So what's like a great way for
Yeah, why don't I take like one more question, and then we'll probably, and then we kind of, cut it off, folks watching this video. It's great that there's a lot of questions. You can always email us at Personal MBA Coach. So my email is Erin at Personal MBA Coach. It's probably not on the website because I take a few clients each year. At Personal MBA Coach. If you have particular questions or you're interested in, working with us, that's wonderful too. And then obviously we'll give more specific advice. So sure, last question.
Last question. Okay. I'm currently working as a senior accounting executive aiming for social impact in consulting. Is this considered as a normal pivot? I do work for an NGO that made me interested in social impact.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a reasonable pivot. I don't know that there's any, it's funny, I can't tell you how many times I will hear, I'm in a non-traditional path, and like the traditional path, non-traditional is the line is so blurry. But I think certainly if you have experience in, social impact, if you're working in an NGO, if you're going to go into consulting, I think just think about sort of the transferable skills that you've gained, the leadership skills that you've gained, in accounting to do that work, but definitely a fair and reasonable pivot.
Makes sense.
Well, thank you, everybody. So definitely reach out if we can help. It's been a great, hopefully everyone found this helpful.
Ready. Thanks a ton, guys. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.